Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green Flag. I'm your host, Lukas Wacker. With me, as always, we have Kyle Cushman, and welcome to the Phoenix recap episode. This is the first edition of the season. Obviously, we have the championship finale way down the road, but Phoenix was this past weekend for the NASCAR Xfinity and Cup Series in the desert, and then we also had F1 season preseason testing wrap up this past weekend in Bahrain as well. Only 3 days for that this season, so we can look at that a little bit later on the episode, but we'll look at the Cup Series and Xfinity Series race first off. But before we get into all that, how are you doing today, Kyle?
I'm doing great because we had NASCAR all weekend, but we also had F1 cars on track. And just knowing that F1 is like a week away and we've got Drive to Survive and all this kind of stuff, it's so great to see. Just makes you feel like everything's really coming back into swing. Because we've had NASCAR back for a few weeks now, of course, and that's the main thing we talk about on the show. So we've been getting into gear with that. But once F1 comes back and once we get everything else coming back in full swing, that's when it really gets into the season. So very excited. Great time of the year in sports just in general as well. It's when everything is kind of ramping up either to the start of their seasons or until the important parts of their season, such as playoffs and stuff. So great time to be a sports fan, and especially so in motorsports.
100%. But before we get into the actual recap of the weekend, our condolences go out to the family and friends of the late, great F1 commentator, Murray Wacker, who tragically passed away this past weekend at the age of 97. He gave us some of the most memorable calls in F1 history. I mean, he was basically the upbringing for a lot of the people that are in the sport right now. He was the voice worldwide for English television for the sport, and he's going to be sorely missed. I mean, I've listened to a whole bunch of different calls in montages and whatnot over the years. And I mean, his voice is just synonymous with F1. I'm sure Crofty will be something like that with us when we move on into our later stages of our lives. But for right now, Murray Wacker, for a lot of people and a lot of the drivers and a lot of the team members and everybody in the F1 community, he was the voice of Formula One. So we want to wish all his family and friends and everybody in the F1 community our best condolences and our best wishes here, as it's obviously a massive loss for the sport, Kyle.
Yeah, he's one of the great sports broadcasters ever, not just motorsports. I'm talking everything. Yeah. His voice was synonymous with Formula One for a long time and will forever be synonymous with the sport. And there's so many different moments that you can think of that have his voice attached to it. And whether it's Senna championships or Jacques Villeneuve winning the championship, or Damon Hill, of course, the one that everyone goes to when he won. There's so many great moments that are captured by his voice. It's going to be a big loss for the motorsports community, but his memory will live on forever, and all those highlights and all those memories of somebody who was truly one of the great sports broadcasters in history.
Yeah, that's a good thing about being a sports broadcast. Your voice will always be there forever. It's just going to be with the clips for the rest of time. So that's
because like for us, we're young, so we didn't grow up with his voice. He wasn't still commentating while we were growing up or first starting into F1 or anything, but we still know him and know his legacy and whatnot because of all the highlights we've seen from the 80s, from the 90s, from the wide range of history that he commentated on. So it's one of the great things that we'll still be able to go back and listen to all those great moments and listen in, but definitely a big loss here in the motorsports world.
100%. We had to start the episode off with that because it's obviously big news, and it's just a sad time. We're losing so many good people nowadays. It's just coming thick and fast, and that's just, I guess, the reality of life sometimes. It's just unfortunate to see that we're losing so many great people in motorsports, celebrities, you name it. There's a lot of great people that are tragically losing their lives here. So we wanted to start off the episode with that today, but we can move into the NASCAR Cup Series race from Phoenix Raceway this past weekend in the desert. Quite the race. Interesting on how you want to look at it. Definitely a surprise winner. I gotta love my stay away from segment with fantasy. Good Lord. Martin Truex Jr. collects his first victory of the season, the fifth different winner of the season in the 5 races so far. So 5 playoff spots are already locked up. I mean, it's not impossible that we could see 16 different winners here this season. With who we've seen win so far, there's definitely that possibility, but it's also the second career victory for James Small atop of the pit box as crew chief for Martin Truex Jr. in the Cup Series. So that's obviously huge for that team. Only won one race last season, basically against their normal 5 to 6 races that they won previous years to that. And this is also his first victory at Phoenix Raceway as well. He's come close sometimes, finished second a couple of times, but he finally sealed the deal here in the desert this past weekend. So a really massive victory for Martin Truex Jr. I picked him to win Las Vegas. I was a week off. So, I mean, I was expecting big things out of the 19 car this season. It's definitely a bounce-back candidate for me, and he definitely impressed. He had a slow start. He got into the wall early on and fell back to about 16th to 18th range there in that first stage, and I thought, yeah, this is the typical Truex of not having the greatest numbers here at Phoenix, but oh man, that 19 car came to life as the race went on, and he found the speed when it needed it most. So your impressions of Martin Truex Jr. here, Kyle, breaking through at Phoenix?
Yeah, it's huge for that team. And you mentioned it, it's the 5th different winner to start the season. And even though it's a big name, I think it still categorizes as a somewhat surprise winner when you look at his history at this track. Of course, he hasn't won at this track before, so it has to be some amount of surprise. It's been a very kind of up and down track for himself. It's a very unique track. When you look at NASCAR, there's not a ton like it, just given the weird configuration, even though it is kind of a normal 1 mile length. It's a different configuration. And it's huge for that team to break through, not just to get a win early on, but to do so at a track where maybe they're not the favorite going in. So for Truex here, we've seen them be very strong to start the season in terms of top 10 pace. They've been in the conversation in top 10s the entire season to start here. But to finally break through here after such a big stretch without a win, obviously going back to the first Martinsville race last year when they last won that first race with James Small, not winning another race all season last year, so many second place finishes, top 3 finishes, to finally go out and kind of snap that streak here at Phoenix of all places. That's huge for that team. Helps build that momentum later. They don't have to worry about the win or anything like that, even though I don't think that would have been an issue. It's something that you don't have to worry about. You can look and try to get playoff points when you can, or just maximize points now. You don't have to worry about any of that kind of stuff. And looking later in the season, of course, there's going to be much more tracks that kind of fit Truex's style and fit the tracks that he's performed at in the past. And the point here now is last year they got a win relatively early in the season at Martinsville, and they weren't able to follow it up with any wins later on in the season. Here, they get a win even earlier in the season. Now they've got to parlay that into something more. We saw that happen time and time again with Cole Pearn, where they just kept winning and kept winning. Hasn't happened yet with James Small, even though he is just a year and 5 races into his tenure atop that pit box. But they can't let the same thing happen last year where they were consistently in the top 5 but couldn't break through for wins. They need to break through and get multiple wins this season if they're going to be a true championship contender here.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge statement win as well. This is the championship finale track. Exactly. So if he's in that championship 4, I mean, the 19 car looks to be pretty solid already here. And like you mentioned, last season was very consistent through the summer months, had like that incredible streak of top 3 finishes, and just never got the win. He finished second and third countless times, never quite had the race winning car underneath them, but it seems like they're on the right path and the right trajectory for this season. Ran well at Homestead, ran well at Vegas. We're expecting maybe a little bit more from both of those races in terms of race winning speed, but here they just came on late. Like they made one good adjustment, a couple good adjustments, and nothing was fine.
It was huge, and it's not something where they were good off the truck and dominated the whole race. They had issues early on. They were able to adjust and became the dominant car by the second halves to the final stage there. So I think that's even better than kind of rolling off the truck, it being perfect and not really having to work on anything. They faced some adversity early on, as you mentioned earlier, tapped the wall there early on in the race. It kind of looked like things might fall apart early for them. And instead they regrouped, they made some adjustments. They went out and became the car to beat by the end of the race. And that's huge to see. It's also something where that's more indicative indicative of future success, where you can diagnose problems during a race, fix them, and go out and be competitive by the end of things, versus kind of the almost dumb luck that it is rolling off the truck really good. We've seen so many hit or misses over the past year since we've had no qualifying and no practice. We've seen some guys absolutely hit it and be perfect all day. We've seen people completely miss. Just look back to that last Martinsville race that we were talking about earlier where Truex won, where it was just chaos the entire time in that first bit of the race, where everyone missed it essentially. So I think it's big to see Truex and that team diagnose those problems early, fix them, and go out and have the dominant car by the end of the race. They've been consistent on speed, but to go out and get the win at a 750 horsepower package at the championship race and at a track where Truex hadn't won previously, that's big for this team going forwards.
100%. I mean, that's two Joe Gibbs Racing drivers in victory lane, and Christopher Bell and Martin Truex Jr. Maybe not the two most likely ones that we were maybe expecting to start this season.
I mean, if you're going numerically, it goes 2019. I guess the next one is 18, but we'll see.
For the love of God, that would be nice. But and then we also have Hendrick Motorsports with Kyle Larson and obviously William Byron at Homestead. So, I mean, those two, you would not think that these are the first 5 winners of the season. No Penske cars in victory lane so far. No Chase Elliott in victory lane. No Kevin Harvick. No Denny Hamlin. Like, this season's off to a really, really wild start. And I'm very impressed with what I've seen so far, and just in terms of the spread of competition throughout the field, and the ability for Truex here to recover from the early mishaps there and get back to the front is a big statement victory, like I said. So congratulations to the whole 19 team. It seemed like Penske kind of had their, their kind of trio up front for the majority of the race, but didn't quite come to materialize. And quickly on Truex before we move on, he has announced that he's going to be running the Truck Series race at the Bristol Dirt, so we can touch on this for Kyle Busch Motorsports in 2 weeks' time. I don't think I remember the last time that Truex raced in the Truck Series was a long, long time ago. He's going to be running the Xfinity Series race this upcoming weekend at Atlanta too. So he's like double dipping here over the next 2 races. So, I mean, we're seeing Martin Truex Jr. on a variety of different cars that we have not seen in a very, very long time. So just getting him some extra reps here, like we've seen a lot of these guys are doing. The Bristol Dirt Nationals are coming up this next week, so a lot of the Cup guys are going to be down there for that race to get a little bit of an experience at the World Center of the half mile speedway there in Bristol. So very, very interesting to see Truex go down to the Truck Series. Obviously going to be in the 51 truck. The Toyota alliance with Kyle Busch, it makes sense, but this is just out of left field kind of. Would have really thought that he would be running the dirt race at Bristol.
I would have thought that like KBM with the 51 would have got like a dirt ringer or something in there, and not somebody like Truex. But hey, you know what? I guess Cup Series comes first, and if the Cup Series guy wants some dirt experience, he can go and get it. Funny enough, Truex's last truck start was in a 51 truck as well, back in 2006 at Michigan. So it's been a long, long time.
Was it for Billy Ballou? Was it that long?
Yes. Yeah. How about that shout? Just 2 career Truck Series starts for Truex, and no top 10s. So if he can go out and do it, it would be his first career top 10, which would be a really funny stat, just given, of course, he's a NASCAR Cup Series champion, of course.
28th all time on wins list now after this weekend
so
as well.
He's been climbing up in recent years, even though he was one of those guys that kind of skipped over the Truck Series there. Going back down is going to be weird to see him down there in the Truck Series, but it's going to be very cool as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that before it comes. Kind of old news. I mean, it seems relevant. So it was a really, really interesting story that came out there after the race on Sunday. So going to be excited to see the Bristol Dirt for the Truck Series and just see what Martin Truex Jr. can do in KBM equipment. So pretty cool on that. I want to touch a little bit on the traction compound here, Kyle, before we look at the other teams. It's a big storyline coming out of this one because it was heavily applied in both sets of corners at Phoenix this past weekend. I don't know what you think about it, but I'm personally against the traction compound. I think it just artificially intensifies the racing, and it just manufactures something that's not really there. I don't think at Phoenix you necessarily need it, and it's definitely just a top groove racetrack because of how wide they spread it. If they made it a little bit of a smaller patch, then maybe we would see a bit more side-by-side racing. On the contrary to that take there, it was the most lead changes that we've had at Phoenix in quite some time this past weekend. So if you want to look at that number, obviously that's a sign of good things. But at the same time, I would rather just see the track in its purest form and not with the traction compound, or at least just a smaller version of it, because I feel like it was just a bit too intense for what we had this past weekend. It just made the top groove too much of an advantage. The restarts and everything like that, it just gave them too much momentum over the long run. We didn't get to see really any passing on the bottom. It was very, very difficult for that. So what is your take on the traction compound? It's obviously varying degrees of success at different racetracks, but this past weekend at Phoenix definitely sparked some intrigue from the motorsports community.
I think intense is the right word to kind of use there in terms of if you use it properly or if you use it in moderation, it can really enhance racetracks. But in this circumstance at Phoenix here, it just kind of seemed like they overdid it. They went intense with it, and it kind of took away the bottom lane or anything you could do with it. You really had to have a much superior car to make that bottom lane work or to pass on the bottom lane. And we would see every single time somebody would be kind of like barely inch ahead on the bottom lane, and then they would just kind of take off from the guy that they just passed, taking the normal line. And it's something where I think at Phoenix, if you do it more in moderation, or if not at all, I think you would still have kind of two lines work a little bit more similarly, where one isn't so dominant in the preferred line. And it's also something where it's obviously, as you mentioned, manufacturing grip. And so it makes it easier to drive. If you're going up on the high side, it's not something where you're having to fight the car, you're loose the entire time, unless you have a setup that's that loose. And we kind of saw that from AJ Allmendinger a little bit in that first race of the weekend. But it's just something where it's just, I don't know how necessary all of it is. There's a certain aspect of it where I can see the argument for some of it, but to the extent that they put it, as you mentioned, it was basically the entire top groove. Like it's half the track, have the actual racing surface, not the apron and stuff, because they use that as a racing surface. But it was definitely something as the race was going along where it's just kind of frustrating seeing everybody migrate to the top groove where you've got so much racing surface to possibly use. And it's something where the bottom lane and running around the apron wasn't really utilized. The only person we really saw going that low throughout the entire race was Chase Elliott at times. And even then, you can only make that work for so long. And we saw with this battle with Kyle Larson, for example, Elliott had the better car for that stint, but because Larson kept the preferred groove for much of that stint, it took multiple laps for him to get the pass done. And it's not saying that passing needs to be easier or anything like that. You do want passing to be difficult. It's just in the circumstance with the traction compound, it's kind of manufacturing things there, as you mentioned. So I don't know if you completely take it away just because we don't have that sample, but definitely needs to be lesser because it was way too dominant in this race.
Yeah, I do. I think, there's two things here. I mean, Phoenix, it's not the greatest racetrack in the world, obviously, but they need to do something
it's an
a little bit.
track.
Yeah, that's what we've graded it as earlier this year with the track tier maker. We were pretty spot on with that, I would say. But I remember just, you had to have that center turn back, 10 years ago or something like that, even less than that. You just had to rip the bottom and then you'd make the apron work. It was kind of a different driving style with how you would have to approach Phoenix. I mean, back in the old 3 and 4, or I guess the old 1 and 2, that is now the current 3 and 4, the top lane was never existent. Like it was just the bottom feeder. But when they restructured this track and then they made it redesigned where the start finish line is on the other side, we've seen the 3 and 4, that the old 1 and 2 become a really essential part of ripping kind of like the higher line. And the thing with the traction compound, we didn't see it before this generation of car because we didn't need it. We didn't need it. This generation of car needs it in order to create passing, and that's the problem with it. It's the car itself. It's not the track's fault. It's the actual car that we have, and I just hate that we see this kind of stuff with the traction compound to enhance the racing, because the only reason that it's there is because they know the cars aren't good enough to make an exciting product that the fans really, really want. So that's the biggest problem that I have with it, is that we know how good it can be. I really, really hope that this next gen car fixes some of these issues and we don't really have to hear about the PJ1 traction compound, the juice, the awesome sauce, whatever you want to call it. There's so many different nicknames for it. I hope we see that in very minimalistic times or minimalistic terms next season, if at all. I mean, they'll probably put it down But at the end of the
Like,
day, I just think
try
I'd rather
it
have
without
it.
Like,
You're
especially
never going to
once
know
you
what the
get,
car can do
yeah.
without the traction compound. So if you put it there, people are going to use it. Obviously, it's just frustrating because I feel like once we tried it, I think it has kind of gone a bit too far now, where the entire track is almost too much of a traction compound
It's
now.
just moved the
And,
dominant groove. And so
yeah,
obviously we did see lead changes and whatnot, but you saw kind of the farther back you got, it basically was, if you had a dominant car or a really superior car, you could get by within a couple of laps, but you really had to time passes, and it was just kind of, you couldn't have side-by-side racing with equal cars in equal lanes. So yeah, it's definitely frustrating there because it is a car problem. It's not a track problem. I would have liked to see them, just because they have 2 dates, of course, try something a little bit different in this first one.
yes.
Go a little bit later on the PJ1, see how it goes, and then obviously you can rectify that for the championship race. But it's frustrating having this kind of track that's so dependent on the PJ1 and everything like that, also then be the championship race as well.
Yeah, that's a big no in my books. But that I just wanted to touch on that because this
No,
is
I think that's
one,
a big talking point coming out of the
it
race.
is one of the most relevant storylines that came out of Phoenix, because there's only some tracks that they use it on, but this is definitely one. It's the championship race, like you said. Like, it's a crucial venue for the season, and I would just hate to see it tarnished by the traction compound. And we see this back in November when we know the front 4 cars are going to be in the top 4, and it's just going to be extremely difficult to pass because their stuff is just going to be so much more superior than the rest of the field because they put every single thing into those cars. Hence, we saw it last year with the championship finale with the 4 cars basically just spreading the field by about 3 seconds. So nonetheless, it was a decent race at Phoenix overall. We just had to address that topic of discussion. But let's look at the actual teams themselves. We'll start off with the race-winning organization, Joe Gibbs Racing. Varying degrees of success once again for this team. Obviously, the race winner with Martin Truex Jr., we touched on him. Denny Hamlin, another top 5 finish this season. Super consistent to start the season. This 11 car is picking up right where they left off last season. This is better than what they ran in the championship finale again last year. So that's huge stepping stones for Joe Gibbs Racing after we saw them struggle in this race last season compared to their counterparts with Hendrick and Team Penske. So Hamlin had a good run, finishing 3rd in this one. Christopher Bell, a guy who I had in my fantasy lineup here, I thought he looked really good in that first stage. Fell back as the race went on a little bit too much than I was expecting. Got into the wall in that first stage. Definitely hurt his chances of getting that performance in that first stage. Had some guys coming on fresher tires behind him. It was just kind of a wrong case, wrong scenario there for Christopher Bell early on. Had a long pit stop there on that last sequence, so I don't know what the heck happened to the 20 car, but nonetheless, still a top 10 day for the 20 car, starting off to a very, very strong start to his Joe Gibbs Racing tenure this season, inside the top 10 in points. Adam Stevens doing a good job with the race calls, and Christopher Bell executing behind the wheel. And then Kyle Busch, a guy that we both had in our fantasy lineups this past weekend, a almost surefire bet it seemed coming into this weekend, the best average finish of anybody over the past 6 races here in the Cup Series with less than a fourth place average finish.
Yeah, what was it, like
really
3.3, something like that? Like,
really, really good numbers for the 18 car this weekend, and they were junk. Got some stage points in the first stage just based off of some pit strategy there, pitting and having a little bit of fresher tires. Got him some stage points, and after that 18 car was nowhere near the success it needed. Had a uncontrolled tire violation that set him multiple laps down, then got back to 1 lap down, and then stayed in the lucky dog position for about the last 100 laps or so, and never could quite get the caution. It was just a rough day for the 18 car, as it has been for basically the past 12 months on the calendar year. You would expect after the weekend that they had in Las Vegas, they could translate that into some success here at Phoenix, and a track that he's run really, really well at in the past. Didn't quite execute on that, finishing 25th on the day for Kyle Busch after getting turned by Ross Chastain as well later on. It's up for debate on how you want to view that. I'm not going to get into that today. But nonetheless, a varying degrees of success. 3 cars in the top 10, then you got 1 guy back in 25th. So what do you make of Joe Gibbs Racing Day? Because obviously it's going to be a positive for the 19, the 11, and even the 20 car, but the 18 obviously had a rough one.
very up and down, I think, because you had basically everybody except for maybe Denny Hamlin to a certain extent kind of be up there inside like the top 10, top 5. and then dropped down with some kind of issue. And it was early on for Truex tapping the wall. They were able to recover. For Christopher Bell, he as well tapped the wall, but it was later on with that long pit stop. They were able to recover to a top 10, but you would have thought that probably closer to a top 8, top 7 kind of car there. For Denny Hamlin, just super consistent all year. They've just been quietly just knocking it off week in, week out. They've got already a fairly sizable lead atop the regular season point standings. And even though they don't have the win, they're clearly atop the power rankings standings right now. They've just been consistent across the board, no matter where it's been. They've been up there in the conversation. And for Kyle Busch, it's just a circumstance thing. I think it mainly is. They had a strong enough car to be in that kind of top 10, top 12 conversation if things hadn't gone kind of haywire at the end. But you have the violation, which puts you laps down, and then you get into the wall, which causes you to pit just before another caution comes out. All these kind of things just kind of combine to a circumstance where a worse finish than what they ultimately ended up deserving. And things started getting frustrating for him at the end. We saw with the Chastain incident, whatever you want to say blame-wise there, doesn't really matter at the end of the day because it didn't really affect the finishing position there. So the important thing for the 18 team is just going to be to write this one off and move on. It's not going to be to dwell on these kind of results because it almost seemed like that's what happened last year. They kind of got into a rut early on and just could never dig their way out of it until like the third from last race of the season, of course, when he ended up winning. But if here, just it's a circumstance thing. You have a random penalty going down pit road, and then you have an incident just before a caution comes out. It's just a circumstance situation here. So move on from this one. It's a track that you would have liked to perform at, just given the stats and everything. Didn't happen for you. Oh, well, move on and hope that things kind of bounce your way, because eventually luck's got to break his way, right? Eventually it's got to start breaking his way. And this one was just kind of another luck thing where penalty on pit road, poorly timed caution right after he gets into the wall and just couldn't recover from there. So I think on pace, even when they were laps down, they were still running in line with what, like 10th, 12th, exactly, with the damage that they had as well. So some silver linings to what was ultimately a pretty poor finish for Kyle there.
Yeah, Joe Gibbs Racing, though, like you said, just up and down day. Truex started off really poorly, but then recovered, obviously, to race-winning speed. Hamlin was the most consistent by far. Didn't have the race-winning ability, but had a top-5 car all day long. And then Bell had seemed like I had a pretty good run going in the beginning part, got into the wall, like I said, and then just was around the 8th to 12th range for the remainder of the race.
Which is a really solid day for that team as well. The thing for them last year that we constantly talked about with Eric Jones was the consistency. One week they would be a top 5 contender, and the next week they would barely be inside the top 15. And so far this season, Christopher Bell has basically outside of Homestead there, where they finished pretty far back.
Surprisingly,
it's basically been consistent top 10, top 12 cars and runs for them. So that's exactly what that 20 car needs. It needs consistency, and that's exactly what they had here at Phoenix here.
Absolutely. We'll move on to Team Penske here. They had a pretty good day overall, I would say, for the organization. Yeah. Ryan Blaney won a stage in the opening one, finishing 10th on the day, excuse me. Just fell back on those final couple of restarts there. Didn't quite get the track position. It was on the wrong line at times, and it's difficult to pass, as we saw here at Phoenix. So he had a better car than what he showed there later on in the going. But then Joey Logano led the most laps in this race, 143 laps. I don't know what to expect from Joey Logano coming into this one. Of course, he's the top finishing for the 1 week.
Strange one.
It's just, I was not expecting the race, the upfront speed that he had this weekend. Like, I thought about the 6th to 4th range or something around there was going to be optimal for Joey Logano. Won this race last year. He's done well here at Phoenix in the past, but I didn't really get the sense that it was a race-winning car throughout the majority of the race. It was just he was putting himself in the right position, executing very, very well for that 22 car, just able to get away on restarts and was kind of setting sail from there. But there was always guys further back in the pack that were hindering themselves that prevented them from getting up to challenge Joey Logano there. But still second place on the day. very much improved from Las Vegas the previous weekend, so they can take that as a big positive for Joey Logano. And then Brad Keselowski, a guy who I had in my fantasy lineup here. You had Blaney, obviously. Blaney he didn't outscore Brad. He was very, very close. It was only 5 points.
No, I think it was like
difference.
48, 43, something like that.
Yeah, it was. So very, very close.
Yeah, Blaney had a very good stage points there. Fell off at the end, which was a little bit unfortunate just in terms of fantasy results there. But for Blaney, once again, another strong top 10 run, at least in terms of the points, obviously barely staying inside the top 10. But in terms of the pure points haul, another strong run from them as they kind of build up as the season goes along. For the rest of Penske, though, I was saying this earlier, it's kind of like spin a wheel and whatever Penske car you get is going to be the top one, because we thought that probably Blaney or Keselowski would be the top one here just based off of past stats, and Logano goes out and leads most laps and all these kind of things where
most points on the day for Logano too.
Exactly, right? So Logano with a very, very strong run. He wasn't the dominant car last year, and I guess you would say he was the dominant car today in terms of him having the most points, laps, stuff like that.
How you want to look at it?
At the end of, I guess maybe most consistent car is maybe the better way to say it, because Truex was easily the best by the end of things there. But Logano shows up well when at a track we thought he would show up well. In Vegas, he didn't maybe as much. And Keselowski, he was good, but wasn't quite as good as Logano was. He was able to get the lead for a couple laps, but then would fall back kind of afterwards. I think Keselowski, I think the stat had like he was in the lead 5 different times for a total of like 17 laps or something like that.
19 laps. Yeah.
Exactly. Which is crazy to think about, to have the lead that many different times, but only lead for a handful each time. And Penske, another strong start to the season for both Logano and Keselowski. Specifically Blaney, a slow start, but they're starting to build it up now here. So especially going into Atlanta as well, a track that Brad Keselowski's been very good at. He's won every other year with Kevin Harvick these last few years. So I guess it's kind of his turn to win it when you look at the past few years. And a little bit surprising, as we mentioned earlier on, that Penske hasn't broke through for that first win of the season. When you look at it, they've basically been the most consistent team at the top of the charts, regardless as to the track. They've had one of their 3 drivers up there contending for the win and just haven't got through.
But
except for Homestead. Yeah, fair point there. Great start to the year for Penske here. Another strong run, especially for Logano, Keselowski, Blaney getting some big stage points in a top 10 there, and hopefully turn those good starting positions into another good run coming up at Atlanta.
Yeah, those 3 Penske cars are going to be ones to watch here. If anybody's going to be able to challenge Kevin Harvick this upcoming weekend at Atlanta, it's probably going to be those 3 guys, or one of those 3 guys at least, because they all run pretty well around there at the 1.5-mile track in Georgia. So that's Team Penske. We'll look at Hendrick Motorsports now. Oh my goodness.
Day.
It all started back on about Saturday night. It was when we learned that 2 of them, with Larson and Byron, were going to be starting at the tail end of the field, along with Chase Elliott the morning of the race yesterday. So, I mean, like all 3 of the main contenders that we thought would be up there at the front, challenging for the victory, all starting from the rear here, getting flashbacks to Chase Elliott's championship victory last season in the fall. I mean, they just like starting from the back apparently, and just seeing what their cars can do in traffic. And
multiple times if you're the 5 car.
Exactly. A lot of speeding penalties for the 5 car, but I tend to agree that starting in the back is a little bit better than starting at the front, because you learn more about your car as the race goes on. Maybe you don't get the points haul that you would obviously want, but I'm on the side that's it's probably a really weird way of looking at it, but I still, that's my rationale.
Someone who had William Byron and Kyle Larson in my fantasy lineup, I would have preferred if they stayed up front, I'll be honest.
Yes, but you did come out with the win at the end of the day, Mr. Cushman.
Just barely, though.
But yet again, I lose by fraction of a hair, basically a point here, a point there. 7 points on the day was the difference between myself and Kyle. So congratulations to Mr.
Solid
Cushman.
Points days, at least for us. 178, 171. It's
more.
Trending upwards. It's trending upwards at least.
It's the bonus picks that are really hurting me right now. I need to get better at the bonus picks, because I was really good at picking the stages last year, and that was my strong suit with we didn't keep track of that. But when I was looking at the overall, nonetheless.
What, you were like top 1,000 or something like that last year?
Yeah.
Thing, and this year we're in like the 80,000 kind of range.
This is the problem with people. This season is just absolutely insane. Yeah, this is the problem with people right now.
Yeah.
Too many people are getting these really. They're not looking at the numbers like we are, and that's the problem. The numbers are not lining up with what the results
should have looked at the numbers more and take. No, because Chase Elliott by the end of the race did get the top Shelby, so never mind there. But I think with Hendrick there, Kyle Larson looked so good for the first like 3/4 of this race, and it seemed like that final run, once they finally got up there, they just didn't quite have it as much. I think if Larson starts up front, I think we see a very different race there. I don't know if you
I agree with that. Yeah,
it's the way that
they were able to starts where it should have been. It was going to be a top 5, top 3, probably a race leading car early on.
Yeah,
you win a stage or two, maybe.
Has the same kind of points haul that Keselowski or Logano has.
Yeah.
And instead, once they get up there and finally hold on to that track position, because they got up there a few times, and then lost.
He passed the most cars by far on Sunday.
Oh my God, he passed the whole field like 3 times.
Yeah.
And just by that last run, it was, whether it was the tires or whether it was just the last run, they just didn't have it or made a bad adjustment or something, just kind of stalled out in 5th, 6th there, and then ended up being passed by Elliott, ended up finishing 7th, I believe it was, for Larson there. A strong day overall, I think, for Hendrick, given the circumstances.
Absolutely.
But I think that maybe a little bit left on the board there when you look at stage points and when you look at
missed opportunity. Yeah, for sure. Chase Elliott, like you said, came on strong late. I don't know what I thought about the 9 car throughout the day. Seemed like he was strong at some points. Then at some points he was just like,
they kind of stalled out in like 18th, 20th, and then came back on in that final stage. It was kind of strange there for the 9 car.
He had a penalty as well. I think it was a speeding penalty or something like that as well in that race. So then he got sent back. And then when he got that penalty, he never really recovered. And then pit cycles kind of helped the 9 car out a little bit. And then he ended up getting a top 5 out of the day somehow. So if I had decided between Chase Elliott and Kyle Larson this past weekend, I would have beat you in fantasy by 1 point. And that's really, really frustrating because that was the 2 I was deciding between. But nonetheless, Chase Elliott does end up getting the top Chevrolet finisher in this one. I think if we saw, like you said, if we see the 9, the 20, the 24 to an extent, and 5 specifically up at the front at the start of this race, who knows what could have happened in this one? Because I think Hendrick maybe had the strongest package overall. They might have just overused their stuff to try and get to a point where they could get into a salvage position.
Was in the top 10 all day long. He had a quietly very strong run once again, and kind of backing up those 2 top 10s last year with another quiet kind of top 10. But that's exactly what that 24 team needs. They just need consistently to consistently get inside that top 10, get those top 5, and obviously wins when you can. But find that consistency, because again, that's something that they didn't have last year, where there were a lot of the time fighting things in the teens. This year, it's not been the story. They've been up in top 10 conversations, and we're once again here. We'll see at Atlanta, because at Atlanta, it's something where Byron hasn't been as strong so far in his Cup Series career. I think that's one where you really get to see, for a lot of these teams, where they're really at in terms of Atlanta being a difficult track to kind of figure out, especially for some of these younger drivers once they get to the Cup Series. It's going to be fascinating to see that, because once again, very different track from what we've seen so far. You can take some similarities from Homestead just in terms of being a worn out 1.5 miles, but even then it's 2 very different tracks. So excited for that one coming up, but definitely going to be interesting to see what kind of Hendrick team we get going into Atlanta here.
Yeah, and then finally on Alex Bowman, he had an up and down day. It spun out early on after contact there, got kind of wrecked into turn 1 and 2 there. Just kind of a chain reaction event.
Happy with the top 15 there. It's
100%.
As we talked about,
I didn't think you'd get close to that.
Yeah, where Alex Bowman hasn't been very good at his home racetrack since kind of his debut, where he had his coming out party. Since then, it's not been so good for him. He's really struggled at this track, hasn't got a top 10 since then. And to go out there, have the incident, and still recover for a top 15, I think that's some promising signs for a team that's had a very slow start to the year.
Yeah, definitely the slowest of the 4 Hendrick cars so far, but I don't know if I necessarily see that continuing for very much longer. I think the 48 car is going to slowly find its groove here, and we'll see what happens at Atlanta, where Finished top 10 at Homestead, so we'll see if there's a bit of comparison there, if he can translate that into another top 10 run at Atlanta here. But Hendrick Motorsports left a little bit on the table overall from this past weekend. Probably had race-winning speed if he was given the right circumstances at the right time, but I think they'll take 3 cars in the top 10 at the end of the day, and now it's Bowman salvaging something.
3 penalties for Larson, 2 penalties for Elliott, 1 obviously for Byron to start at the back.
Yeah.
So 6 total penalties for that team, plus then Bowman having an incident. Like that was a chaotic race for Hendrick Motorsports there. I think they'll be hoping for a much calmer one coming up at Atlanta.
100%. Let's look at Stewart-Haas Racing here. Kevin Harvick obviously kind of leading the charge there, finishing in the top 10. Never had a top 5 car, I would say. The entire race was stuck in the 6th to 10th range.
And once again, that's a concerning sign.
It is, definitely. This is a track that Kevin Harvick was the master at before we moved to this current aero package. I would say even a little bit before that, he was starting to digress a little bit with the track. But with the new configuration, if you want to call it that, along with this package, Harvick has not been anywhere close to what we saw him in the past year when he was just basically a surefire bet to win every time they came to Phoenix. That is not the case anymore for the 4 car, but he was the leading SHR car from this past weekend. Eric Almirola also had some troubles throughout the race. He had a penalty, I believe, for speeding
going
as well
into
in
that
this
final stage, and to recover to an 11th place finish is big for that team. We talked about it on the last show as well. He was kind of if you wanted some value, maybe go with him, rough starting position. So it was going to be tough to really maximize that fantasy value, but got up there. Did he end up getting those stage points at the end of stage 2? He was there in 8th, 9th by the end of things. I don't know if he ended up getting it.
I think he got 2 there.
Yeah, so right around that, a couple of stage points in there, but that team, rough start to the year. Phoenix is Almirola's arguably his best track. And to go out there and get almost a top 10 with that starting position, that's something where you can take that momentum and start to turn it into something decent. So a nice run for them, but overall Stewart-Haas just not kind of the runs that we maybe thought or maybe anticipated. When you look at last year's spring race at Phoenix, 2nd, 5th, 8th, and 9th, all 4 cars inside the top 10, and 1 inside the top 10 this time around, and that in 6th. So some worrying signs for Stewart-Haas Racing here. I think we'll finally truly get to see where they're at after Atlanta, where it's another track where Harvick has been really dominant recently. It may be a little bit different from Phoenix, where over his career, Harvick has been dominant. At Phoenix, less so in the last handful of years in terms of going out and winning the race. Atlanta, that's a place where he's been so dominant recently. If they don't show up with at least a top 5 run after that worrying. I think that's when worrying turns into potential panic button a little bit because they need to start.
He has to have a top 5
quickly.
This weekend. Yeah. This is his track. This is his playground. I mean, how many years did we see him dominate in the Xfinity Series, then the Nationwide Series? Nobody could beat this guy in the early 2010s at this track. It was just incredible.
And this is something where once you see Harvick at Atlanta and where they're at, essentially, is where you get to diagnose the entire team. Because with a couple young drivers there, with Almirola, they're kind of in that 10th to 15th range, kind of just generally. But with Harvick, that's a top-tier talent. That's a top-tier driver. If they're struggling to get a top 5 at a track that he's still dominant at Atlanta, I think that's when we start to go, what's the real issue here with Stewart-Haas? So a solid top 10 run for Harvick again. He got a solid points haul, but not the kind of dominant race-winning ability that we maybe anticipate from that team and that driver.
Yeah, for sure. And then the rest of SHR there, finishing well outside the top 20. Chase Briscoe back in 22nd. And then Cole Custer had an issue there later on in the race, getting into the wall.
Where was he running at that point? Who was it that got into him again?
I don't remember who got into him, but it
was
it
was Bubba.
Was it Bubba?
It was the weird crossover hesitation. So that would have been in the 12th to 15th range at that time. So it would have been a decent day again for Custer. He's had some rough luck to start this year as well. He's had some good runs, turned sour by the end of things. But Difficult run for Briscoe in his
He
first
said he
race
had
here in
some
the Cup
issues,
Series.
but
Yeah,
they had some
it's
speed.
also a track that he's struggled at in his career to this point, so maybe something that we weren't all that surprised with. But given the speed that Stuart Haas has shown in the past at this racetrack, and specifically at this exact race last year, where all four, as I mentioned, were inside the top 10, disappointing day here.
100%. We can look at, I guess, Ricky Stenhouse Jr. here quickly, because he had a pretty solid run there.
Yeah,
in
top
12th
finisher
position.
outside of those top teams.
Yeah, that's the big kind of like Eric Jones was last week at Las Vegas.
Yep.
This is the highest finisher outside of the top four that we usually talk about there in the sport. So Ricky Stenhouse Jr. bringing it home with a very, very solid top 12 day, off to a pretty good start to this season, I would say. I think he's 16th in points right now.
Yep.
So he's in a good spot. The JTG cars are actually splitting Kyle Busch right now. So I mean, I don't know what you want to read into that, but they're off to a very good start by their standards of what we saw last season. This is definitely a step in the right direction. And Ricky Stenhouse Jr., I had him in stay away from once again, and here he is getting a top 15 run here at Phoenix. So it's just encouraging signs that we're getting these midfield battles and mid-pack cars getting up here inside the top 15, challenging these bigger teams that we expect to go out there and dominate. We've seen that the past 2 weeks. The big guys have come out to play, unlike what we've seen in the first couple of races of the season. We started to see them establish their place of where they usually are amongst the rest of the field. So Ricky Stenhouse Jr. here can feel pretty good about a 12th place run.
For sure. And they've been super consistent to start this year, outside of the first couple races, which are kind of hit or miss, specifically a couple 18th place finishes. So solid finishes, at least in those two. But since then, Homestead 13th, and we're running up higher before that as well.
Yeah.
Vegas 11th, Phoenix 12th. So very, very solid top 15 runs here. And for JTG, as we mentioned, rough year last year in terms of consistency, having a lot of issues, had multiple last place finishes in a row consecutively for that team due to crashes and incidents, and to go out and start the year as consistently as they have, with both Stenhouse and Priest both inside the top 16 in points after 5 races, that's huge for this team. And Stenhouse once again inside the top 15, very strong run from him here, top car outside of those top teams there. Beating the likes of DiBenedetto, both Chip Ganassi cars, 2311 RCR cars. Big day for that team.
Yeah, for sure. We can look at the notable finishes from this one, I guess, now,
Yes.
Kyle. We talked about the big ones. The entire top 10 is essentially the big team, so we don't need to spend too much time on them. Obviously, Eric Almirola there in 11th is probably the biggest one that you were kind of expecting maybe something from this past weekend. So that's a nice, hopefully a rounding into form here for the 10 car after a very, very slow start to this season. Yeah. Then we can start off with Matt DiBenedetto in 14th place there. Up and down day, nowhere near what the Penske cars that he's affiliated with in terms of speed, but still they just need to get these finishes put together after what they should have gotten in Las Vegas, which would have been a top 12 run. They can take this this is a top 15 run, 14th place. They just need to finish these races in the top 15 consistently for the next 6-7 weeks, I would say, to get them back into form. It's got to be methodically there, but this is obviously a step in the right direction for Matt DiBenedetto, Kyle.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, just an awful luck start to the year, and just kind of crawling back in the points, and getting those top 15 runs, getting those top 15 points are going to be big for this team going forwards. And the big thing is, on the days where you don't have a potential top 10 car where you can compete up with the top guys, still salvaging good finishes. And we haven't seen that outside of, well, really so far this season, just given some of the bad luck they've had. Solid finish here in 14th. Obviously would have liked a couple more positions there. They were up and challenging for the top 10 a little bit there, but for most of the day they were in the middle teens. So getting a finish that was in line with the kind of the running position, again, just helping that owner point situation, helping that average finish to go up there and get some better starting positions. So at the tracks where you do know that you can compete at, you're going to be better suited to get some early stage points there. So for DiBenedetto, again, just kind of crawling back into the conversation here, similar to Almirola as well. Decent day for them.
Yeah, Kurt Busch in 15th. Guy we both had on our fantasy line. Yeah, this is definitely disappointing. I was expecting a 6th to 10th run for him, or 6th to 12th range for Kurt Busch, but he was really nowhere near that the entire day. Started off really slowly, just kind of fell back throughout the field, and then just kind of stagnated right around in this spot for the remainder of the race. Didn't quite go forward, didn't quite go backwards. Disappointing day for Chip Ganassi Racing after what we've seen from Kurt Busch for the first couple of races, and then these past 2 weeks have been a bit more of a struggle than what we maybe would have anticipated from the one car. But I imagine that he's going to be picking it back up here at Atlanta, where he's had exceptionally good numbers in the past. So just a day you forget for Kurt Busch, and then you just kind of move on to the next one for sure. And then Bubba Wallace here. This is an interesting one because they actually showed some really, really good speed, worked their way up to 7th purely on speed at one point in time during the race. Then they made a call with the caution falling at the wrong time with Tyler Reddick blowing a tire. So then it kind of was at the end of green flag pit stops a couple laps after that. Bubba Wallace stayed out the longest out of anybody, it seemed, during that pit sequence. So he stayed out under that one of the last or penultimate cautions there or final restarts and got the lead. Obviously, everybody else pitted around him for 4 fresh tires. He was on 7th. Yeah, every single person pitted around him. 7 laps on the tires, so you wouldn't think it would be too bad, but he spun him on the restart. Everybody was just really getting on him after the restart. They pounced really, really quickly, and the 2311 car there for Bubba Wallace fell back pretty heavily. And then we saw the contact with Cole Custer, obviously. So it just kind of fell back. I don't think the finish was indicative at all of what the speed was of that 23 car. Should have been about 12th, I would say, up there in the 12th to 9th range. But encouraging signs nonetheless, because this is a team that this is their best finish so far of the season, so they can take that as a bit of a positive. I wasn't expecting Bubba Wallace to have maybe the speed that he did this past weekend, so hopefully this is a good sign that they are rounding into a little bit of form here, getting the kind of the bad bugs out of the system here, and hopefully this is a good start to their 2021 season now that we're a couple of weeks in, about a month into the season now. This has to be where the 2311 car starts to find their form after Phoenix here, Kyle.
Yeah, that's a questionable pit crew call there. I really don't know what the thought process was. Like, you could have hoped that more people were staying behind you, but it was clear that that wasn't going to be the case. Yeah. I really don't know what you could have hoped for. They stayed up front for a little bit, but dropped back pretty quickly. And because of that, it kind of cost them some track position by the end of things, by the time that the next caution came out. And luckily for them, it was relatively quickly. It was a decent run, but like it wasn't like a huge long green flag run between cautions there. It was like 15, 20 laps or something like that between, or maybe even less. So for Bubba Wallace there, they were up to 7th on pace there, and to kind of throw that away because of a weird kind of strategy call, and ended up finishing 16th. That's a disappointing one for me. I think Bubba Wallace, it's also a track that he's been low-key pretty solid at in his Cup Series career, with some solid underlying numbers there. Should have been in line for a top 10, top 12. In the end, they finished 16th. It's still a decent day, but they had potential for more. They had potential for more, and it was kind of thrown away the potential to do so because of a weird pit crew call. So questionable call there from Mike Wheeler. Don't know really what the thought process was there, but overall a decent day for that team as they continue to trend upwards here.
Yeah, it's the first weekend that we've seen that they are faster than Trackhouse. We saw at Vegas they probably were faster than Trackhouse, but they had the
early issues, so we didn't get to see the head-to-head. But in terms of raw laps, Bubba Wallace had the pace there. But yeah, this I think was a missed opportunity to get a good points haul here.
For sure, I agree with that. It's just positive on how you want to look at it, but missed
looking at the silver lining. But overall, this is one when you get down to Daytona and you look at the point situation. If you're a handful of points out, if they do turn it on in kind of the second half of the regular season here, you'll be looking at results like this where you could have had a top 10. I think is fair to say, given the speed that they were showing at the end of that green flag run. Weird strategy call, put you a little bit farther back, cost you a little bit, and in the end you finish 16th. So each point matters for these teams looking to make the playoffs on points. We don't know if that 23-11 team will be a race winner by the time the regular season ends. We'll see if that happens. But for them, disappointing finish with some silver linings, though.
Yeah. As we mentioned, Kyle Busch back in 25th. A lot of your usual suspects there after Bubba Wallace that we've touched on quite heavily throughout the beginning part of the season. The Daytona 500 winner, Michael McDowell, finishing 23rd, falling back down to earth, I would say, after their very, very strong start to the season, but where that we would expect them to be running on these
It's also
occasions.
been a track that McDowell struggled at in his career, so it's something we kind of expected them to return down to format. But again, in years past with Michael McDowell at this track, you're looking at 27th, 28th, 30th kind of finishes here. And instead of still another top 25 run. Again, some people had some issues. Kyle Busch, of course, would be one that you would expect to jump over him. Some other people had issues like Cole Custer late. So you would have expected him to be maybe outside that top 25. But for McDowell to still at a track that's been one of his 2 or 3 worst over his career in the Cup Series to still get a top 25 run just shows kind of the improvements that this team has made.
Yeah, and then finally, Anthony Alfredo. I felt so bad for him after that early incident, getting wiped out by Cody Ware, finishing 37th on the day for the 38 car. Not much more to reflect on that one. It's just unfortunate for Alfredo that just needs to get laps under his belt, and then he gets taken out, something like that, where it's just back of the pack.
With that incident too, I don't know if Alfredo was off the pace because Cody Ware was on the lead lap still, and Alfredo actually wasn't. I don't know what happened in that circumstance because it didn't seem like Cody Ware had anything go wrong with the car. They had some decent speed versus Rick Ware kind of expectation. They were still in the lead lap at that point, as I mentioned, but just a weird incident there and an unfortunate one for a couple guys that want to get laps down and weren't able to do so in this one.
Yeah, that's the notable finishers from the NASCAR Cup Series race at Phoenix Raceway. Let's give this thing a grade, shall we, Kyle?
Let's do it.
This is an interesting one. I don't know how I want to look at this, to be honest. Do you have one in mind, or?
I've got I'm looking at a couple numbers. Okay. I'm looking at 6.5 to 7 for myself. I think it was a solid race overall. It wasn't a banger. It wasn't terrible. You had multiple lead changes. You had some different faces at the front. But as we mentioned earlier, the traction compound was kind of the name of the game. There wasn't a ton of opportunity to pass unless you had a much better car. And we saw that with the Hendrick cars kind of struggling to come up through the field. It took them a decent while to get up to the front, and then they decided to do it all over again for the 5 car. So I think I'll land on a 7 overall. I think it was a solid race. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. You had different faces at the front throughout the entire race. It wasn't one person dominating the entire time. You had the storyline of the Hendrick cars coming through the field and what they would be like at the end. You also had multiple different pit penalties for people, so that mixed it up at the front as well. But at the end of the day, it was a big team dominated race. It was something where once Truex got back to the lead, you knew it was kind of over from that point. So overall, I think it was a fine race. Nothing spectacular, nothing terrible. Somewhere between 6.5 and 7. I guess I'll go like a 6.75 then, in between there.
I'm gonna go a 6.5 on this one. I can't give it probably any higher than that. I don't know. I don't know what to think. I don't know what to think about this race because it's just kind of just a race in general. Like, it's not like anything that you're going to really remember for history or anything like that. It's just, you're going to have those sometimes. Like, we had 2 really good ones at Homestead and Vegas. It was kind of due for a little bit of a set down, a palette.
I think the big thing is that we look at this as the championship track, and that kind of affects our thought process on it, because if this was just like a race where there's no championship implications because of course it being the championship track and all that kind of stuff, I think we're like, fine race, those are going to happen this year, it's okay to have average races, solid race, let's move on to the next week. But because it's the championship race, you have to look at it even more, and that kind of brings down kind of your thought on it in general, because you go and you look at it and you're like, okay, that was a solid race, and then you're like, oh yeah, this is the championship race. If imagine if this was the championship, like that kind of stuff. So kind of artificially brings 100%. It down just like subconsciously. But I think, average 6.5 to 7, something in that range. I think you're sticking with the 6.5 there.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll go like a tiny little bit higher. I'll split the difference with a 6.75.
Yeah, the 2.5 miles this past couple of weeks were like really, really good. This is just not.
They were like
remotely
top tier
close
stuff. So
this is what we expect from Phoenix, to be honest. We'll see if it can be better for the championship finale. I'm hoping that it is. My God. I
Start
mean,
them
I
all
would
at the back.
basically just fail them all in pre-race inspection and just let it
I
go
mean,
from
at least
there.
we will have practice and qualifying, so at least we'll have some storylines out of it all. But
Maybe we'll see.
I mean, fair. But
Nonetheless, that does it for the NASCAR Cup Series race at Phoenix. Let's go into Cush's threes here, Kyle. This is
yes,
your portion of the show, so take it away.
let's do it for the Cup Series. We're starting positive as always. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. We talked about him earlier, was the top finisher outside of the big teams, finishing 12th, kind of stayed in that range for most of the day. In the teens, ended up finishing the best of the rest, I guess you could say, to a certain extent. But the big thing for me as well is, as we mentioned earlier as well, 16th in points. They've been super consistent to start this year, just kind of in that 11th to 15th range, just getting kind of those best of the rest points, finishing among the two top three cars that aren't among those top teams. And that's exactly what a team like JTG needs to do. They have both cars inside the top 16 in points. Rough day for Ryan Preece here. We kind of expected that given his past history at this track, but for Stenhouse, going out 12th place finish, top 16 in points already, or through 5 races still. Great to see for that team. Great run for him. Hopefully they can continue that momentum after what was a very rough season last year. Looking at the Xfinity Series now, Brandon Brown is the easy pick among these. New career high for 3rd place finish, 9th in points still through 5 races. This was a team that needed to be very consistent all year long to have a shot at making the playoffs. And with some of the issues that some of the other playoff teams have had, Brandon Brown has capitalized and did so especially at this race, going out, getting that 3rd place finish, getting some attention as well from Marcus Lemonis. So hopefully we see some sponsorship there coming down the pipeline, because that's a team with a great story. It's a family team. Brandon Brown has had some great results over the past year, kind of bringing that program up to a new level. They have some sponsorship issues this year. They have quite a few races that don't have sponsorship so far scheduled this year. Hopefully with results like this, they have more companies jump aboard, because this is a great story, a great family-owned team, and a competitive one as well. So hopefully we see them get some more sponsorship later this year. Great to see them have that new career best of 3rd, and sticking with the Xfinity Series for this next one as well. Bailey Curry going out and getting a 7th place finish, new career best for both himself in Xfinity and for Mike Harmon Racing in the Xfinity Series. That team's been around for a long time. They have 2 total top 10s in their history. Their first one last year with Kyle Weatherman at Kentucky, beating that with a 7th place finish here at Phoenix. Awesome to see for Bailey Curry, who's been an underrated driver in the Xfinity and Truck Series. He had a 6th place finish last year for Nice Motorsports in the Truck Series, having a couple of starts there for that team and the rotation that was the 44 and by the end of the season 45 trucks. For Mike Harmon here in Xfinity, running full-time for them this year. Awesome to see them go out and get a top 10 run for that team. Best for both Curry's career and for Mike Harmon as an owner. Absolutely deserving of a shout out here. To the negative side of things now, and we begin in the Cup Series with Ryan Newman. And this is a track where they've won relatively recently. I think it was back in 2017 that he won at this racetrack. They were just way off the pace in this one, finishing 28th, beat by both Spire Motorsports cars. Chris Buescher, same team, finished 18th, and they even had a worse day than maybe expected. But for Newman, just not even remotely in the conversation for a top 20 all day. I don't know if they had maybe an issue or something that wasn't really talked about or something like that, but they just completely missed all day, weren't able to rectify it. And a really, really rough finish that would have been even worse if it wasn't for some late issues from the likes of Tyler Reddick, from Cole Custer, because if not for that, they would have been like 30th on pace. And that's not something that we expected to see at all from Roush Fenway. Maybe they put a lot of effort into the 550 package, like we saw at Homestead with them early on in that race. Maybe we see them bounce back this upcoming weekend at Atlanta with that different package, but just way off the pace for Roush Fenway in general, but especially for Ryan Newman, just completely missing the mark. Second, it's the first time we're going to a non-driver for this one. Mike Wheeler, just the brutal call to stay out. Ended up costing them a shot at staying inside the top 10 there, I think. Just a weird call to stay out. There was too many laps left to stay out there and keep that position. If it stayed green the rest of the way, they would have finished even farther back. I really don't know what the thought process was there. I really don't know what the benefit would have been to that call, honestly. I don't know what scenario needs to happen there for that strategy call to pay off. Didn't happen in this one, and ended up costing 23XI a shot at their first real top 10, because on that green flag run just before that pit stop or caution where they decided to stay out where everybody else pit, they were legitimately 7th on pace. They were having a great green flag run and just didn't pan out by the end of things, largely because of that call to stay out. So Mike Wheeler, unfortunately, is the first crew chief to end up on the negative side of Cush's threes. And finally here to Xfinity, this is maybe a bit of a weird one because they still had a really solid finish. But when I'm looking at some of the things that happened during this race,
oh no,
a bit disappointing in this one. It's not the guy you're thinking of.
Oh,
AJ Allmendinger, I'm looking at for this one. Was a bit hit or miss throughout the first part of the race. Had some handling issues all day, were a bit loose, weren't maybe the top tier that we were expecting from Kaulig. They were kind of the third Kaulig car for much of that race. But the big thing for me is the rookie mistake to wreck Brandon Jones. That's something you expect from the rookies or sophomores in Xfinity. It's not something you expect to see from somebody that's a Cup Series veteran that has taken a couple of years off and is returning to the Xfinity Series. That's something that we criticize rookies for often in the series. We've talked about it multiple times with people such as like Noah Gragson and things like that, where it's rookies that are too aggressive early on in their careers that need to kind of figure that out for themselves. Brandon Jones was having another fantastic run at Phoenix and had that day ruined because of AJ Allmendinger just kind of being too aggressive. I really don't know what the decision was there, because he just straight up dumped him essentially. So for a veteran in a series that's essentially at this point in its history designed for people coming up the pipeline rather than coming back down, really disappointed to see that kind of move from AJ coming off of a week where they were so good and going into a week as well at Atlanta where they are the defending winners here. You would expect them to be up there at the front again. Just less so for the result and for everything for the day, but more for that move specifically in that wreck with Brandon Jones. That's not something that I want to see or would expect to see from somebody with the experience of AJ Allmendinger. So that'll do it for Cush's threes. A bit of a different one for Xfinity there, because there wasn't really, just because of the chaos at the end, true, real disappointing pick by the end of things. Riley Herbst was having a rough day, but ended up salvaging a top 5 finish. So great for him there to go out and get that top 5 finish when for much of the day they were outside the top 10. But rookie mistake from not a rookie driver there in AJ Allmendinger.
Yeah, that was quite the Xfinity Series race, to say the least. But good Cush's threes there, Kyle. I agree with most of the things that you said there. I was really nervous about this last one with AJ Allmendinger. I'm like, oh no, he's gonna put Herbst in there. Oh no, but I can definitely agree with that, because that was
just, what was he doing?
An amateur move. Just definitely disappointing. But let's look at the Xfinity Series race here quickly before getting into Formula One. Austin Cindric is your victor after this one at Phoenix, going back to back at this track. Yeah. Race winner pick, baby. All right. Got that one correct. So he gets his second win of the season after winning the season opener at Daytona. Had a bit of a break here. Let the competition have a couple of wins, but now Cindric is back into full form here. It goes back to form. Goes back to back, at Phoenix, like he did obviously the defending series champion. The odds-on favorite to go back to back again this season. I mean, this cat is just on a roll right now. 5 top 5s in the 5 races so far.
Come on.
I mean, he's just so consistent on every single form of track that we have. Short tracks, we haven't really seen that yet, but I imagine he'll be in the top 5 there. But mile and a half, road courses, super speedways now is starting to run into shape. Obviously, winning the season opener, that does pretty well for you. So this
he'll be doing double duty at Atlanta this weekend. He's running Cup as well.
To say that, he was. He's going to be running for obviously Team Penske here, making his second career start in the Cup Series after starting the season at Daytona as well for Team Penske, and getting actually a pretty solid result in that one. Obviously, went up in a big big ball of fire in that last lap crash
Yeah.
there in turn 3. So hopefully it doesn't end the same way for Austin Cindric this time around at Atlanta. So we'll see on how, if he could be a sneaky fantasy play this weekend, if you want to maybe save a usage or something like that.
It is a Penske car after all.
It is a Penske car. So we'll see what happens with Austin Cindric, but looking forward to see him back behind the wheel of a Cup Series car on a 1.5 mile track and see what he can do. Going to be pulling the double duty like Kyle said. So going to be obviously having the momentum for Phoenix, see if he can translate that into success at Atlanta. So really solid run for the 22 car, but we can look at the notable finishers from this one. There was just a lot of incidents late on in this one that took out some big heavy names, but Ty Gibbs, this man is unstoppable right now. Won the ARCA race on Friday night, and then won second place in this one for the Xfinity Series, getting a first and a second place finish in his 2 Xfinity Series starts to date. Austin Cindric does get the redemption on him after the Daytona Road Course, so I guess there's a bit of a
It was
one-to-one
funny, Cindric on the call for the ARCA race as well. They're just kind of sitting in silence as they mentioned his Xfinity win there during his burnouts and whatnot. But no, an awesome run for Ty Gibbs, learning the track as he went along throughout the day, avoiding all the chaos.
Good.
Avoiding all the chaos at the end of the race and being there to pick up the scraps and get that second place finish. Probably not a finish that he maybe necessarily deserved when you look at some of the other people throughout the day, but it doesn't matter what you deserve. It matters what you ended up finishing with. And that was a second place finish, being up there to take advantage of other people making mistakes at the end of the end of the race here, where there was so much chaos at the end of this race. I was shocked we made it. I was shocked that we didn't have a second overtime there. And for Ty Gibbs, goes out and gets another top 2 finish, which is awesome to see for him in this Xfinity campaign. Obviously not running full time, not running for playoffs or anything like that, but owner points does matter for that 54 car.
Yes.
And that's huge for them going the rest of the season, and for Ty Gibbs specifically looking into the rest of this year and also next year when you would imagine he's full-time in Xfinity.
When you look at what Ty Dillon's done in that car, what Ty Gibbs has done so far, I mean, that is very differencing in finishes here. Like, this is
not even just the finishes, just average running position as well.
If I'm looking at Martin Truex Jr. this next week and I'm looking at my chops with this 54 car in the Xfinity Series, like, this is a race-winning car that I'm very excited to see him in at Atlanta to try and go up against Austin Cindric here, because you know that that's probably going to be the favorite coming into this one. But A.J. Allmendinger won this race again last year, so I'm very excited for this Xfinity Series race this upcoming weekend at Atlanta, because I love seeing the Cup guys come down to Xfinity. But yeah, Ty Gibbs, really solid run here, and I'm really excited to see what he can do on the 20 races that he has scheduled for this season. That's a lot of races, a lot of experience for him to gain for next season, which we anticipate he'll be going full time in. I'd be shocked if he isn't, because right now he's 15th in points after running 2 races, and he's ahead of Noah Gragson, who's run all 5. That is really exceptional stuff. So I don't know what to expect from the Xfinity Series season right now, but Ty Gibbs is definitely my breakout driver of the year, surprise driver of the year, everything in those categories that we maybe predicted in the season preview.
Hey, my boy Sam Mayer hasn't started yet, so we'll have to see how he compares.
He's got some high expectations to go up against here now.
Yeah, he does.
It's gonna be
and
tough.
Hey, don't forget Sam
that.
Mayer beat Ty Gibbs last year in ARCA as well, so that's going to be a fun one. And there's going to be a handful of races as well where they go head-to-head in Xfinity as well. So that second half of Xfinity is going to be great to see once we get Sam Mayer in there as well. Not to take away anything from Josh Berry, who had a good finish taken away from him here. But there's some fun races coming up in Xfinity.
100%. So congratulations to Ty Gibbs on another successful run. Avoided all the chaos on that final restart, so he gets a second place finish at Phoenix. Brandon Brown, he touched on him at length. Really impressive run here, just capitalizing on other people's misfortunes there later on in the race, finishing 3rd. Exceptional run for that 68 car. Really happy for him. We didn't predict him to make the playoffs, but if he continues to plug along with finishes like these, well, not 3rd every week,
continues to struggle, 10s,
that's the big thing, right?
The door's open.
We thought Ryan Sieg would be really good this season, potential maybe for a win if circumstances fell his way with the new Ford Alliance and everything. terrible luck to start his season, and hasn't quite got a finish remotely close to what that car has been running. Saying that, though, he hasn't had the speed that I thought he would to start the season as well. So needs to get it turned around here. Hopefully at Atlanta, we'll see Ryan Sieg get it back into form that we saw the past couple of seasons, but he finished 37th on the day in this one. But Brandon Brown, definitely a storyline on the positive side of things, as Kyle mentioned earlier, finishing third in this one. Riley Herbst recovering after having a mediocre day, to say the least, up until this point. Avoided all the chaos on that final restart. A lot of these guys were just in the right place at the right time, where all these guys in the outside lane just got it checked up. So Riley Herbst get a top 5. Really needed that finish for this team. Has had terrible luck. He's been running better than what his results have had showing. Wrecked it at Las Vegas. Wrecked at the Daytona. No, where did he wreck?
Daytona Road Course. He went through the grass and blew up the front splitter.
So he's just had terrible luck. Wrecked it at Daytona as well. This team just hasn't quite found that break yet. This is hopefully a sign of good things to come. Obviously, a championship winning car last season, or championship contender car from the majority of the year with Chase Briscoe. Herbst just needs to get consistent finishes here, get back into form. He's outside the playoffs right now. If it were to, he's actually in. He's 12th right now in points. So he would be in if it were to end right now. Just needs to get back into that top 7 range, I would say, for that 98 car for what we expect from Herbst and that team. But SHR, we look on the Cup Series side of things, has struggled a little bit. So hopefully that's not a thing that's going to happen in the Xfinity Series program, but top 5 for Herbst. AJ Allmendinger getting 5th, but we talked about him with the incident with Brandon Jones. Yeah, not a great look on the 16 car after winning last weekend in Vegas. Didn't quite get the luck on his side here in Phoenix. So gets the top 5, still consistently in the mix there each and every week, as we expected from AJ Allmendinger this season. And he's going to a track that he won at last year. So I'm expecting big things from him at Atlanta. Then Jeb Burton here. Got to talk about him because he messed up the final restart and took out nearly 3-4 cars.
I don't know what he was thinking there, man.
He sent it into turn 1 and missed the bottom and took out Hemrick and Justin Haley, who all had really good runs going up until that point. Top 5 cars, top 7 cars.
Man, that guy has such bad luck and at the end of the races, man.
Yeah, I told you that he has got like the black hat. Like he's got the black hat. He's got everything.
He cannot catch a break.
No, he can't. He won a stage in this one as well, did Hemrick. So, like, he just cannot catch a break. But Jeb Burton still, even though he caused the wreck basically there, finishes 6th, though.
I guess it worked out for him.
He's 3rd in points right now. Better than what I was expecting for Jeb Burton right now. And
he's been
the leading calling
consistent.
So, really impressive.
Yeah.
Bailey Curry, we touched on him, finishing 7th.
Awesome.
Wow, what a run. I'm glad that they gave him a shout out there at the end of the broadcast as well. Special shout out to Daniel Suarez in this one, making his broadcasting debut.
Yeah, that was awesome to see.
They harped on the accent too much, in my opinion. They need to get over that. He's just like the rest of us. He did a phenomenal job, in my opinion. I love the Spanish couple of laps that he got to commentate. And then he stumbled trying to get into, because he's so used to talking English, and then he kind of got into the Spanish stuff. And then a caution came out, and he's like, "Caution's out, my amigos."
That was awesome.
Really great
when
stuff.
When he calls down to Cindric and Cindric responds, "What's up, amigo?" Like, come on, it's just like perfect. It's awesome to see. So
it's great exposure for him too.
It's great to see different people get in the booth as well. Because we do see
in Phoenix, close to Mexico, it's a perfect spot for him to make his debut. With the Spanish and Mexican audiences most likely going to be tuning in a little bit more there, with Phoenix being so close. But yeah, really great to see.
And he did a great job too. So hope we see him a couple more times throughout this year.
100%. I think he's in that drivers only broadcast that we see a little bit later on. So I'm looking forward to him. I think he's a pit reporter, so I'm very excited to see him do that. So congratulations to Suarez. He did a great job, my man. And looking forward to seeing him back in the booth
amigo.
Here. My amigo. Yeah, my amigo. Yeah, it was such a great job by him. I was super impressed.
He's so fun and upbeat. Like, how do you not love the guy?
Exactly. So happy to see that he's getting a break in the Cup Series now too. On a side note, really needed that for his confidence and everything. So Justin Allgaier there in 8th, had a top 2 car throughout the majority of the races we expected going into this one. Almost won the race on the final restart, got to Cindric's outside into turn 1 and 2, and then got into the marbles off of turn 2, smacked the wall, just had to drive it home, and finishing 8th at the end of the day with Allgaier.
You got to push that hard at the end when you're looking for wins, but unfortunate there. Average running position of 4th, so exactly kind of the Allgaier run we expected to see. And for Junior Motorsports, with the terrible luck that they've had to start this year, continuing in this one once again, maybe not the finish that Allgaier was hoping for, but at least a solid points haul.
Yep. Behind him, Brett Moffitt, he had a spin earlier on, recovers to get a top 10. So that's positive for what it was looking like it would be a bit of a disappointing day for him. Should be running Xfinity points.
Hey, we don't have a truck series race here to compare it to.
But still a very good run for the O2 car. This guy is just consistently getting really, really good results. So happy to see Brett Moffitt and that O2 team really, really coming into form this season. We expected some things out of them last year to end the year. He's taking that to heart this year and getting top 10s pretty consistently here in 2021. Jeremy Clements getting a top 10 here. Great run for that team. I believe he had a top 10 run earlier this season, if I'm not mistaken.
Homestead.
Was it Homestead? Yeah.
First career at Homestead, and goes out and gets another one here at Phoenix. An awesome start to the year for Clements as well.
Yeah. And JJ Yeley in 13th place.
They should have got a top 10.
Oh, I know. Oh, it's so frustrating. Some of these guys, you wish like the Xfinity Series, you could just have a top 10 with like a whole bunch of lower names. It's just names are made here. Let's just try and make these names even more so. But JJ Yeley, awesome run in 13th place there. Big names obviously had problems there late on in the going, but he had true speed in this one. Very consistently in the top 15, I would say, throughout this event. So very, very solid run for JJ Yeley, a veteran of the sport that we've seen for many, many years. Has had quite the career, up and down Cup
races
Series with JGR.
Everything as well.
Yeah, he's super, super talented. And great to see him getting runs like this. Timmy Hill, what a great this guy, man. He just keeps on chugging along. Finishing 14th in this one, that's all you can ask for. I mean, top 15 run at Phoenix for a track that most of the powerhouses usually excel at as well. That's a big momentum boost for that team there in 14th. Santino Ferrucci once again getting a top 15 run at Phoenix. 2 weeks back-to-back here, Vegas and Phoenix. Had a bit of a rough one at Homestead, obviously. Scraped the wall quite a few times, but now he's really found his form. And if that 26 car is a top 15 car, that's really, really massive steps forward for Sam Hunt Racing. Yeah. I can't ask for a better start for Santino Ferrucci there for his
he's been really strong
so far. So, a very, very impressive run. Was in the top 12, I think, at one point as well. Like, that car was actually pretty decent. So, very, very impressive from him. Colby Howard in 16th place there. And, of course, we got to shout out our boy Tommy Joe Martins in 17th place. Just gets these top 20s pretty much consistently. And Stephen Parsons in 18th place. That's awesome for that team. And then he had all the big names back here. Daniel Hemrick, 23rd, nowhere near the signs of where he should have finished, but finishing 23rd, still second in points. Justin Haley, 26th, had the incident there as well late. Brandon Jones, 33rd. Josh Berry, 36th. Heartbreaker for him because he was so good. Yeah, awesome run there. He was doing so well, and then you gotta love the double bird. It was just basically Christian Eckes at Ben Rhodes last year in Texas. It was just fun to see, and they actually blurred this one out this time, so it was. We made sure they didn't cut to that live.
Yeah, they kind of overdid
it. Blurry.
Yeah. Might as well just
really even see Josh Berry.
Screen. Yeah,
exactly. Pretty funny there. And Josh Berry did not get the finish he deserved in this one.
No, he would have been for sure a top 10. And we were talking about it a bit where this is a track more towards his style of racing. It's something where he can pull more from his career with the late models, and obviously not a 1-to-1 or anything like that, but it's more in line than a 1.5 miles is going to be, for example. So unfortunate to not see the finish there for him because he was coming along as that race was going along inside the top 10 pretty solidly. So unfortunate there to get caught up in kind of something unfortunate there for himself. But at least we got a new little meme or clip to use up there.
Absolutely. Ryan Sieg, 37. We touched on him a little bit. Needs to get it back into form here for the 39 car pretty quickly here because they can't afford to fall behind here too far because it's not necessarily a race winning car week in and week out. They were just the epitome of consistency last year, and that's why they were so good. Yeah. And they need to get some playoff points here, and that's what they did last year with different strategies. They haven't quite done that year.
26th, 58 points right now, and when you look at the cut line right now in 12th, that's 98 points. So you're already looking at a decent amount of gap to make up, and that's only to Riley Herbst as well. If you're talking about the teams that you would expect to be competing for that final spot for, Jeremy Clements 134, Brandon Brown 137. So you're already looking at more than double ground you got to make up through 5 races here, and that's going to be difficult for that team unless they go out and potentially get a win, which they could if they start to find the rhythm. We saw them have top 5 runs near the end of last year and at times last year. They can absolutely go out and do it. Just you gotta flip that switch soon, or else you're going to be in some trouble.
Yep, Junior Motorsports here, finishing 38th and 39th with Michael Annett and Noah Gragson. They are off to one of the worst starts in their history as an organization here. Gragson cannot catch a freaking break. This is none of his fault, obviously. It just seemed like something went wrong underneath the hood of that thing, oil line, something like that. And that thing just caught on fire, and he was done for the day. Just extremely disappointing for both of these guys. All 3 of them, Josh Berry, Michael Annett, and Noah Gragson here, finishing outside the top 35 at Phoenix. Like, you would never expect that. Nope. But it's just it's great opportunity for these underdogs. But at the same time, these guys got to get turn it around here pretty quickly. Specifically, Noah Gragson. I mean, he's 19th in points right now. Like, that's crazy to think. I mean, I have him in my championship 4. He's definitely got race winning ability. Should have won Homestead.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Like, it's just the luck that the 9 cars had this season. Yeah. So I don't anticipate it happening for very long. They just need to get this stuff sorted out sooner rather than later so that they can get some playoff points built up. And that's what really matters at the end of the day. They'll win a race here eventually. I'm not anticipating them not to. It's just that they need to get some consistent finishes going because they've had anything but that to start 2021. But that does it for the notable finishers from the Xfinity Series race this past weekend. Just congratulations to Austin Cindric and Martin Truex Jr. on their victories this past weekend, along with Ty Gibbs for the ARCA win. Yes. Very, very impressive showing from all 3 of those guys. And it's a big statement win for Cindric and Truex with championship finale implications at this track later on this year. So any final thoughts on the NASCAR Cup Series, Xfinity side of things before we quickly touch on Formula One?
Yeah, I think overall solid races. The Xfinity one was a little more chaotic, to say the least. But I think overall you're going to have those weekends where it's just solid average racing, and that was one of those here. There's nothing wrong with that. Those are going to happen. You look at any other sport, not all 82 games or 162 or whatever are bangers week in, week out. So for NASCAR here, you're going to have those average races. It's just unfortunate that you look ahead and it's also the championship track. But congrats, as you mentioned, to Martin Truex Jr. Awesome to see them back in victory lane. See the emotion from James Small as well after that one. Great to see that. Truex as well, showing a little bit more emotion after that win as well than maybe we've seen in years past. For Austin Cindric, business as usual in Xfinity. We expect him to be dominant all year. For him, it's about gaining the experience, getting those laps, getting those victories, and excited to see him coming up at Atlanta. I think that's an interesting pick for his next race in Cup Series. I like that pick when you think of the tire wear, the amount of driver ability that comes in that at that track. Makes a lot of sense when you think about that there. So excited to see him coming up at Atlanta, coming off a win here at Phoenix.
Absolutely. Just a solid weekend of racing there at Phoenix.
Yeah.
What we expected, but we touched on that quite enough for this episode. Let's talk about Formula One here as their preseason testing has come and gone relatively quick this year compared to their usual 6 days that they usually have.
Felt like a long FP1 or something like that.
Essentially, we got a lot of race distances done by a lot of the teams this past weekend. Lots of miles logged at Bahrain, and the season is now less than 2 weeks away. Oh my goodness!
Next week is race week.
Yeah, that's what they tweeted out today. So I'm very much looking forward to that. We're gonna have our F1 season preview later on this week, so make sure you come back for that because it's gonna be must-watch action and content.
And then follow it up with Drive to Survive. So a nice couple back-to-back days there if you're a fan of Formula One. But no, I'm super, super excited. When you look at the potential mid-pack battles this season, is going to be phenomenal. Can Ferrari bounce back with Carlos Sainz now in the fold? What does Aston Martin look like as they rebrand and now bring Sebastian Vettel into the fold? There's so many different storylines and things to watch. Oh yeah, Daniel Ricciardo at McLaren. Like there's so many fun things.
Sergio Perez at Red Bull.
Oh yeah, that little thing. Like there's so many great storylines this year, and we got like a little taste of it in testing. And obviously, if you're taking anything out of the lap times and testing, you need to maybe give your head a little bit of a shake, but it's still great to see.
Take with a large grain of salt this past weekend.
Yeah. But you know what? I don't care because Formula One cars were back on track. And honestly, just from like a sport media perspective as well, it's really fun just to watch it and see how they fill like 4 hours of just kind of testing. It's really
Yes.
cool as well, just to hear kind of conversations and whatnot go along. Like I know I was watching a little bit of testing at one point because my sleep schedule was absolutely destroyed. I was watching like 20 minutes, half hour, and the entire time they were just kind of brainstorming tracks and corners where a son has raced on a corner named after their father or someone that they're related to, because
Wow.
apparently turn 1 at Bahrain is apparently called Michael Schumacher corner, which nobody calls it. It's just turn 1 because it's
No.
Bahrain. But they were talking about that. Ted Kravitz had brought it up. They were talking about it because
Oh,
obviously Mick,
Ted.
and it ended up becoming a 20-30 minute thing where they just kept
Wow.
brainstorming different corners, and it was just like a really fun different thing. And as you see cars going along, like it's just such a different thing. It's so unique to motorsports and to Formula One specifically,
Yeah.
and just great to see so many different faces and whatnot back on track.
Absolutely. Max Verstappen with the fastest lap so far through preseason testing.
World
Red Bull.
championship right at that. No, stop.
Will
No.
Red Bull look really, really strong? I know it's difficult to know in comparison. I don't want to read into it too much, but we're going to read into it a little bit. Mercedes logged the least amount of laps out of any team this past weekend for preseason testing, only 304 compared to the most there with Alfa Romeo with 422, matching with AlphaTauri. So both of those logged a lot of miles, but Mercedes with the least. And then Aston Martin as well, right there with only 10 more laps with 314. And then everybody else is kind of really close together in the late 300s and the early 400s. Just a weird weekend, just in terms of how you want to look at it. There's definitely some interesting storylines to try and look at coming into Bahrain, because AlphaTauri looked really, really strong in terms of single lap speed. Yuki Tsunoda impressed massively over his tenure so far in the 3 days so far. I think he only ran 2, but I think he had like
So.
a split
There was
stint
a lot of
on one
different
day. A lot of
ways
different
to
times.
split it up, whether it was splitting each day or one day for each driver, whatever. There was a lot of weird stuff going on, but no, AlphaTauri did look good. And it's something where a lot of people have been talking about them maybe getting into that mid-pack battle a little bit more this season. There's been a lot of
Love that.
chatter about that over the off season, which would be great to see as well. And we saw them have some real flashes last year at times. Of course, the win for Pierre Gasly is the one that stands out, but overall, a lot of really solid performances year long from both Gasly and Kvyat as well, which often goes overlooked. Bringing in Tsunoda into the fold, really, really young, raw driver. He's only been in single seaters for a very short time. When you look at his career, he's been moved up the system very quickly, but has also adjusted very quickly. So excited to see what he does. Looked very strong, as you mentioned, over the weekend. But again, we don't know what the fuel loads are like. We don't know what qualifying trim or anything like that they're going for. We don't know any of that stuff. So there's only so much you can take out of it, but some promising signs early on for AlphaTauri there.
Do you think Mercedes is sandbagging exceptionally, to an extent we've never really seen? Because this is uncharacteristic, where it seems like the car is a handful from the eye test, right? Like there's no doubt about that. That's just common fact. The car looks to be a handful for Bottas and Hamilton to drive, but Red Bull looks like a really solid piece overall. But how much is Mercedes sandbagging, or do you think that this is just what we may have seen from Mercedes, a little bit kind of a handful, and they just maybe missed it with the aerodynamics this season? I don't know. It's a long season, obviously, the longest in F1 history, so they have plenty of time to try and fix this issue that they seem to be having in preseason testing. But going into Bahrain, what are you thinking here between the two power horses here? Because those are the two that are going to be the championship favorites.
Well, we'll find out in a week and a half for sure.
Yes.
But I think the main thing to look at is less about the single lap speed or anything like that, and more about the laps logged. And they were by far the least throughout the whole weekend. You would also think that they probably need the least when you look at their history. But there are some concerning signs there with some of the issues that they had in terms of the gearbox, stuff like that, some of the handling that you mentioned. I don't know if it's them maybe going out and just trying like different setups and stuff to see, or to get drivers back in shape. I don't know. I'm not concerned at all because it is testing. We won't even know through like free practice 1 probably as to whether they're sandbagging or not.
Q3.
I'm not concerned yet. It's going to take a while for me to be concerned about Mercedes. It's testing. there's so many different things that they could be trying out or doing. There was obviously some frustration from the team in general, just because of the limited amount of laps that they were able to log and compared to everybody else. And in the shorter time frame, you just don't have the ability to kind of miss on a day like you have maybe in years past. Yeah, not a great showing for Mercedes at testing, but it's a good thing it's not worth any points.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's just crazy to think preseason testing is come and gone
already. It's trying
to
find that balance, right, of how much you take out of testing, like the massive grain of salt, right, like we mentioned. But like it's also not nothing, but like I don't know. It's trying to find that middle ground.
It's the first time Red Bull's been fastest in preseason testing in a long time. We've seen Ferrari do this exceptionally well. They were the fastest in preseason testing for many, many years there, but Mercedes was second fastest.
And every year it would be Ferrari's making the charge, and then
it would just flip because Mercedes was just super consistent. Ferrari had a bad race here or there. Mercedes.
I think it'll be closer because
I think it's going to be really close in my opinion. I think it's going to be really, really close.
Isn't coming into full effect in the way like the rule changes and all that stuff, but there is a cost cap coming into this year, and there are changes that have been made. When you look at teams like Aston Martin, they've actually been able to add staff, whereas other teams have had to subtract things. And so there is some legitimate potential change to the running order. I'm just not sure if that's going to come at the top end. I think it might make things closer between the top two teams, but I'd still be shocked if we see any change at the top of the grid.
Okay, fair enough. We'll see what happens in our preseason preview episode that comes out later this week. That'll be where
very excited for that one. The season previews are always so much fun. We had a ton of fun with all the NASCAR ones. Very much looking forward to the Formula One that we got coming up later this week.
Absolutely. Any final thoughts on preseason testing? There's not much to dig into because it is just preseason testing at the end of the day. And I mean, obviously the most important thing over this next week is Drive to Survive, right? Like we have to reflect on the season that was one more time before we are officially able to look at 2021. But really looking forward to that later this week.
Yeah, I think the best thing you got to look at is from testing is Red Bull looks really strong, and we'll see if that maintains throughout the season compared to Mercedes. But at least in the vacuum that is testing, they look really strong. Max Verstappen looks on top of the world. It's going to be interesting to see where they land. When you look at the short pace in terms of the in terms of single laps and stuff like that. The running order does kind of reflect what you would maybe anticipate with Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, Aston Martin, Alpine, AlphaTauri, Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Haas, Williams. Ferrari seems low. I'd expect them to bounce back a little bit more this season. But when you look at that breakdown, it seems relatively in line with what you would expect. Some changes in that are expected, but I think Fernando Alonso looked really solid being back in an F1 car. I would have liked to see more laps for Vettel and Aston Martin just to get used to that new engine and new car there. McLaren looked strong. It moving over to the Mercedes engine with Daniel Ricciardo.
I'm very excited for that.
I'm super excited to see that just in general. But I think at the end of the day, take everything with a grain of salt. The biggest takeaway is just that we're 2 weeks out from racing. The biggest takeaway is not the lap times at all. It's just the fact that we're that close to the start of the season. So very excited to see what comes in the next week or so in terms of any news or tidbits coming out from testing into the first week of the season. But season preview coming up later this week. Super amped for that. And of course, Drive to Survive, going to be wasting many, many hours watching that this weekend when I probably should be doing other things.
Most likely. We do have a test coming up, but that can go on the back burner for this one. Hopefully he's not watching this episode. But that'll do it for this episode of The Green Flag. Make sure to follow us on Instagram at The Green Flag Pod and Twitter at The Green Flag Pod as well. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. All the links to our social channels will be in the description of the video. And don't forget, you can still join our fantasy league for NASCAR. It's not too late. We are off to a pretty slow start, so it's not impossible, but make sure you go join us there if you so please. But for this episode, I've been Lukas Wacker. He's been Kyle Cushman, signing off for now. We will talk to you later this week to get you set up for the 2021 F1 season.